Hello, my name is Fabian Schwartz. I'm the CEO of Scrum Network and the author of Your Scrum Playbook. And I'm here on the Agile Uprising show with Jason. Thanks a lot, Jason, for having me on your show.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Agile Uprising podcast. I am this episode's host, Jay Hersko, and join with me tonight, we have a special guest. We have the president of the Scrum Network and the author of the new book, Your Scrum Playbook, Fabian Schwartz. Fabian, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We are excited to have you. As I was telling Fabian before we started recording, he sent me a copy of the book so I can do some homework. Because you all like to know we like to do our homework before we have our guests on. And I held up a copy that was dog-eared and bookmarked and highlighted at the wazoo. So one of the things we're going to go into as we talk to the book with Fabian, there is a ton of knowledge in this book, folks, and I can't understate it. So, but enough of me blathering, let's go in. So, Fabian, the first thing I have to ask you about, you opened up the book with an introduction about yourself, and you grew up in East Berlin. Right, yeah. Which some of our listeners may be young enough to not remember there was an East Berlin, and then you ended up in South America. So can you just give us a little bit of background about you and that story?
How that worked out? So yeah, well, I grew up in East Berlin actually, and when the wall came down, I had no impact on that, but it just came down. So yeah, I was working for a couple of years in Germany, and when I turned 30 more or less, I moved to Australia, which was like the first big step. I did my MBA there, and from Australia I then moved to Colombia, and from here I do lots of work in basically all Americas from north to south.
Okay. So then in the book, you start going into your first experience with Agile, which I think is great because I guarantee you there's a lot of reformed project managers, ex-project managers that listen to the show, myself included, that can understand where you're coming from. That you started out with talking about how you were involved in a project, and keep me honest here, it was a waterfall project, and you reached a point where you ran your test suite, and out of 200 test cases, nothing passed. Did I get that right?
Yeah, totally right. Actually, we were supposed to deliver at that date, and nothing worked. And that was obviously a big problem because that was, if I remember right, like a big program, a $70 million budget, government project. And well, you can imagine what happens, no? Like they don't pay you, you have to pay fines, you have lawyers and audits all around you. So yeah, that was a big headache.
So and then you ended up with Scrum because you were forced to retrench. Like you said, I mean, you're long on cost, you're short on time, and if I understood the way you self-deprecatingly referred to yourself as, I was inflexible, and you had quotes around that, and how I would prefer to tell you how to do it my way or not do it at all, and yet you ended up working with this methodology, and you really took a shine to it. Can you talk about that a little bit? Like how did that journey resolve for you?
So actually, like my real first experience was years before in a startup where we switched to Scrum because we had some problems. It worked, and I wouldn't accept that Scrum basically rescued our project. So for me, it was just luck. And this story repeated itself for a couple of years. Now, when we came to this project, we almost went bankrupt because of that project. So the first problem was the client didn't want to pay. So it's logical because we didn't deliver, but it's still a problem, right? So you don't have any money. So we had to let go more than half the people, and we still had to deliver because otherwise we had to pay fines. So somehow we remembered we had an emergency meeting, and we remembered, okay, the Scrum thing had worked a couple of times for us. We don't know what else to do. Well, we die here, we try something, so we rather try. We tried. This time we did it actually well. So we trained everybody. So we didn't just, let's do some Scrum what we download from the internet. We trained everybody. We tried to do it by the book, and it worked. In 4 months, we delivered 100%. So that finally, after several experiences, was when I said, well, something about this Scrum works, because otherwise it wouldn't produce frequently those results.
So second time was the charm. And and the part of that story, Fabian, I find interesting is you literally self-taught yourselves. You self-taught each other. It's not like you went out and hired a super expensive Big Four consulting firm. You really, out of necessity, retrenched and found your path through.
Yeah, we did that, but I have to say I had lots of experience before where we basically tried to teach ourselves, and it didn't work because we didn't teach ourselves well. So we did what we call now Franken Scrum, like we just added stuff from here and there, and so we had some trial and error before doing that.
Okay. We jokingly call that, the taco Scrum, where it's titles and ceremonies only. You're now a Scrum Master. We're going to do stand-ups, and nothing changes.
Yeah,
so, so Fabian, the subtitle on your book is "It's Poker, Not Chess," and I'll be honest, I didn't get it when I first saw the cover. But after I read through the book, it made a lot of sense. So can you explain for our listeners the thought behind the genesis behind that idea of where typically we look at it like it's a chess thing, where it's really more of a poker thing?
Yeah, so I'm certified in almost any traditional project management certification that you can imagine. PMI, Prince 2, IPMA. And basically, through my MBA was when I realized we were all the time to think like a chess player. So you see all the opponents, you can evaluate all the possible moves, you plan until the last detail, maybe do some scenarios, but then you basically execute your plan. And then there was a saying from Annie Duke, a famous poker player, around something like that, like business not like chess, it's more like poker. When I thought about that, I realized that that's not true. You can't anticipate everything that happens. Like chess is still a game that has lots of scenarios, but theoretically you can foresee every single move. Why business doesn't work like that. Like sometimes you don't even see your opponents, but for sure you act in uncertainty. So you see some of your cards, but you don't see all your cards. So I think business is more like poker, and projects work more like poker. Like you some things you see, but lots of things you don't see. You just do your best guess.
Right, that complexity monster, the VUCA that Dave Snowden's always talking about, it rears its ugly head. Along those lines, you had another analogy in the book that I thought was brilliant, where you talked about how, imagine if we rode a bike like we planned our projects, where I'm going to go in this direction, I'm going to hold the handlebars this way, and I'm going to go. And if we try to do that in real life, you'd end up falling over or crashing into something. So I thought that was, I liked how you worked that in the book about how that's another analogy where if you think you're going to plan every move out ahead of time, you're really just planning your own failure, because there's no way to predict whatever's going to happen.
That's what it's all about, right? So if you're in a complex environment, we can't foresee everything. Mm-hmm. We for sure we can plan and anticipate some stuff, and we can have an idea what we do when this stuff happens. But no way that we've tried to foresee everything. Just doesn't work.
Right. And you actually had a line in here where I think a verbatim was, Scrum is best for complex systems where uncertainty is high with a low cost of change. Right? So it's where you don't know what's going to happen, but yet the costing of change is not that bad. Yeah.
Obviously, you don't want to build a house and then the house owner tells you, well, I like the house, but I would like to have it over there. But it's probably not a very good try there.
And along that point, Fabian, you also go in talking a lot about the value, right? So what is the value of doing Scrum and getting your ducks in a row ahead of time? And one of the quotes I actually pulled out here is you said, until you discover where the value is, Scrum is of little value to you. And I love that quote, because, there's a lot of talking now about business value and business agility. You can't trip and fall without running into some safe guy talking about business value. But yet you nailed it, right? Like, and that, I think, Fabian, cuts to the core with some of the transformations that we see, where companies are doing it maybe because it's a managerial fad, and they don't really get that, there's a reason you're doing this, and you may have the best intentions, but you're going to end up driving the car off a cliff.
Yeah. So my thought is this. First, you're absolutely right with that. And I think in Scrum, people are very obsessed with the Scrum Master, right? Because it has Scrum and the word master to it. But if you look at it, so what does the Scrum Master do without taking off some of responsibilities? But he's focused on improving the team, getting the team better, servant leadership, right? Making the team better. So basically, he tries to make the team run faster, if you want. It's not the best analogy, but think of it like this way. Now, what's the problem? If you run fast into the wrong direction, it doesn't help you anything. So if you produce crap faster, you haven't achieved anything. So I think we should pay also a lot of attention to the product owner and to what value is for us in order to basically run in the right direction, correct?
Right. Like you said, if you're delivering crap faster, you're just getting more crap. You're not getting good stuff. You're just getting more crap. And to that point, a large chunk of this book, Fabian, is really, I took a lot of it about how to, I think you actually call it a Scrum implementation guidebook, right? Like, so if I want to do this in my current world, these are some of the things. And I love how you said you don't have to do it. You don't not have to do it, but you have to think about it, because how you decide is going to have ramifications later. So right. What led to you coming to this turn of phrase in the book, right? Like, and I probably should have asked Ariane, like, what led you to write a book to begin with? But how did you end up with not only we talked about the poker analogy, but how did you end up with the guidebook idea itself? Like, how to do Scrum from the ground up?
Yeah, so, well, the initial idea came from someone in my company. I was against it. And it took several years, at least 3 years, until I started writing. So they said, you have to write a book, you should write a book. And they had lots of reasons for that. And I said, no, why would I do that? We have the Scrum Guide. The Scrum Guide is 16 pages long. It's pretty clear. It's easy to understand. There are rules of the game. It even says Scrum Guide, the rules of the game. So why would I write a book? And also there are lots of Scrum books out there. So why would I just add to all this confusion? So, but working with our clients over the years, we realized so that the Scrum Guide tells you what to do, but the questions the client asks us is not what to do, it's how to do it. And if you think about it, like to use again the chess and poker analogy, so if you think about chess, what happens if you know the rules of the game? Well, you can play chess, but there's no way that you win against only half good player. So what we're thinking is, well, we have to tell people, we have to help people with the how. So to go back to these analogies, and we said, okay, well, in sports, what would that be? So it's a playbook, right? It's the strategies. What are the strategies? Like, you have the rules now. What are the strategies? So that's where the idea came from, and actually, I remember I was talking once to Jeff Sutherland. It's already a couple of years ago. We were talking about that someone had just asked him to write the foreword for his book, and he mentioned that he gets several of these requests, and there are some reasons that he doesn't like to do that, in several cases. So I asked him, well, what would a book need to get a foreword from you? So what are your thoughts on that? What is important to transmit into the world? And based on those ideas, I started then finally taking on the idea and writing the book.
Okay, so a chance conversation with Jeff Sutherland kicked you into high gear.
Yeah. So we know there was a lack in the market for that kind of book. And the conversation with Jeff helped obviously to push me forward.
Nice, nice, perfect. Serendipity, right? Serendipity is a big part of life. So, one of the things I took out from the book, Fabian, was you start talking about the implementation guidebook, and then you start talking about how to shift things, how to do this. And one of your quotes that I thought here was great was the worst enemy of good Scrum is bad Scrum. So you mentioned Franken Scrum already. So can you explain that, like what your experience has been, and why you think like bad Scrum is the biggest enemy we face?
So I think in our agile coaching world, there's a lot of bashing on other frameworks and methodology going on, and particularly, for example, against the PMI and traditional frameworks. And sometimes it gets to a point where I feel it's like this is the enemy, so the PMI is the enemy. But in our experience, the PMI never was the enemy in the transformation. So when they start to transform, they already knew they have to move on. So what we learned is it's actually not difficult to explain Scrum to someone that is new to Scrum. But it's seriously difficult to explain Scrum to someone that knows that thinks he knows Scrum, but for some reason has a bad understanding of Scrum. So there are, for example, what is it called? There's like this S-book or something, Scrum Body of Knowledge that's like
I've never heard of that, but it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, this has a very weird explanation of Scrum. It's from another certification entity. So what happens is if people think they know Scrum because they have learned that probably not the best way, then it's seriously difficult. And then people think they do Scrum and they say, well, we do that already, so it doesn't work for that and that and that reason. And actually then they say that Scrum doesn't work. So we found the biggest problem is when you have bad Scrum in place, when you don't see results. You see results, but nobody complains, nobody argues, nobody discusses. If you see results, well, it's contagious and it's basically implementing itself, to exaggerate a little bit. If you don't see results, well, then you have a problem.
And you hit the nail on the head when you said, when people say, well, Scrum doesn't work, because the typical coaching response, right, is, well, you're not doing it right. And I've had that same argument. I've heard that same argument applied to Scrum, SAFe, communism, right? Well, you're just not doing it right. It'll work. It's the people, right? And that's not true. But I think you hit the nail on the head where when you walk into a coaching engagement and they had a previous coach that maybe has led them down the wrong path, or maybe they found their own way and it was like Scrum Butt or Scrum Terfall or Franken Scrum, right? Getting people to your point, getting people to unlearn that is infinitely harder than getting a blank slate and saying, hey, you're all from the PMI, you're all standard project delivery. Take an experiment with me, take a leap of faith, and maybe you'll get something out of it, because that's really what it is.
Yeah. Maybe there's another thing I would like to add, actually. So this is one thing, like teaching someone that it's already thinks he knows Scrum, but I think that's not. Well, yeah, that's one of the challenge. But there's another thing that just came to my mind. You're not doing it right? So what you said. So I think there are even companies that do it right and still don't get anything out of it. And I think that one really big problem we see is when they start doing it right, the team, they discover lots of problems, or what we call an impediments, right? Mm-hmm. And some companies will not resolve these impediments. And then the team gets frustrated and it's obviously not getting better because all these roadblockers are in the way. And then they also say Scrum doesn't work. And they have done it right. The only thing that didn't happen is they didn't have the support to get the block. To be fair, not say, okay, it's yeah.
So when you talked about PMI and how sometimes there could be an almost insulting attitude some people take towards traditional project management, where you and I both understand that agile, waterfall, that there's, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and there are times when that actually works. You gave a great analogy early on in the book with the dragon on the Christmas tree, where and for those readers, you haven't read the book yet, I don't want to spoil it for you, but basically Fabian ends up throwing somebody out of his house because they make fun of the fact he has a dragon on top of his Christmas tree, right? And that person is saying, well, that's stupid. Why would you do that? Fabian, do you see that where sometimes we, even as coaches, we sometimes trip ourselves up by when you walk in and you tell somebody what they're doing is stupid or ill-advised, right? And if you do it in that way, you really torpedo yourself and you don't give them an open mind at all. Like you're closing their mind before you even say anything. I'm assuming from that analogy, this is something that you've seen as well, where somebody's walked in and said, oh, well, you're not doing it right, and here's your problem. That a fair statement to make?
It's pretty fair. Actually, to be honest, I've done that myself several times in the beginning. And I think even though we're consultants at the end, like we have at least some consulting skills, right? So we can paraphrase that in the most beautiful way. But the message is the same. Like if you go in somewhere, let's say that to traditional project management, they have some kind of values there and your message is like everything you've done is wrong. But you can say that in the most beautiful way possible, but what you've done is like you have just closed their mind.
Right. Whatever chance you had, you've torpedoed yourself.
Yeah.
So there's another, and again, there's for those listeners, the book is peppered with a lot of analogies that make you step back and they make you think, which is one of the reasons why I enjoyed it. At one point, Fabian, I'd like you to explain this instead of me reading it out of the book, right? You compare the product owner and the Scrum Master to Steve Jobs and Jesus Christ. And that's the comparison you make. So can you walk our listeners through that without giving too much away out of the book, obviously? Yeah.
So first of all, let's talk about the product owner. Okay. Well, I put the Steve Jobs analogy because of the following reason. We were just talking about value. And I think the product owner is a very essential role. So he is the one that has to make sure that we actually are able to deliver value, that we run into the right direction. And how does he do that? So he used the vision. So in my opinion, he's a visionary. He's a like Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, this kind of personality. Obviously, in some organizations, it will be a little bit smaller of a role because it's a smaller project. It's not Apple. But think of it as a very visionary person, because at the end he has to create a purpose for the team, which is the main team motivator. So if he isn't able to do that, well, he won't deliver. And the Jesus Christ analogy comes from the servant leadership. So servant leadership is usually attributed to Robert Greenleaf. But if you read religious texts, it's not only Christianity. There's also other religious texts. They have the servant leadership idea, like thousands of years before Robert Greenleaf, right?
Right.
So Jesus Christ was like this sheep dog or servant leader idea that came to mind when I was thinking about if people should think about the role of a person, like who would that be? Like who's the perfect servant leader?
Right. It was another one of those things where I stopped and I went, where is he going with this? And then I read it and I went, well, actually that makes total sense. So kudos to you, Fabian, for creating a very, very unique analogy. So there's a big chunk in the book where you talk about, without actually using the word, you talk about empowerment at the team level, giving teams the tools and the ability to do the things that they know are right. And you introduced something which I'd actually never heard of before, which was decision latency, right? So I had never heard of this before. And the statistics that you gave in the book and I think this is from, keep me honest, this is from the Standish Group, same people who do the Chaos Report.
Yeah.
And they talked about how teams that make decisions in less than an hour are 58%, they're successful 58% of the time.
Yeah.
Whereas a team that takes 5 hours or more to make decisions is only successful 18% of the time. So to me, that is completely bananas. I think that's like a 300% delta or something like that, something insane. So that ties to you, and you make this point quite well. lowering that, what Dan Mezek calls that decision-making floor, right? Like bringing it down to a point where people should own their own destiny.
Yeah.
Where have you seen, well, not where have you seen. So in your experience, how do you get the clients you're working with, how do you get this nugget into their head that they need to let go and let the decisions happen at the people who are going to have to live with those decisions? What has been your experience there?
So I usually ask them this. So I ask them in the States you would call it soccer. We call it football.
Fair enough.
in a soccer game, who's the project manager? And then they will start, okay, like the technical director, the trainer, the coach, right? And then I ask them, okay, yeah. So what does he do? Then okay, yeah, he the strategy, players, roles, whatever. And then I ask them, okay, when the game starts, okay, who's making the decisions? And they will say, well, the players. And if somebody says something different, then you ask them, okay, so how would that look? Sometimes somebody says the captain, right? And then you ask them, how would that look? So a player gets the ball. Now he asks the captain what to do. The captain asks the coach what to do. The coach tells the trainer, the captain what to do, and he tells the player. By then they already lost the ball. So that this is the analogy I usually use to make them understand. Like if you don't move fast, you lose. And this statistically supported, right? Like just like it's easy to ignore a statistic because there's no motion to a statistic. But if you give them something they can connect to, then it's easier to understand.
Perfect. And speaking of statistics, you had a throwaway line in the book, which I giggled and sent to a bunch of people. As anyone who follows the investing world knows, you had a line there where it said, numbers don't lie, analysts do. And I thought that was brilliant because you look at Bloomberg or Goldman Sachs telling us to buy as you're watching the stock market nosedive, right? The analysts, numbers don't lie, but the analysts do. So I have a question for you, Fabian. You used a term at one point, which I've never really heard of. So I'm really curious because you said, I don't want to go into this. Hippie Scrum. What is Hippie Scrum?
Okay. So, we have lots of big agile movement, let's say here in Latin America. Okay, and this movement has fractions, okay, with different philosophies, and there's one fraction that is extremely focused on team happiness, up to a point that they say the most important thing at Scrum is that the team is happy. And I remember at one point in time, I added to a comment of that, and that they are more productive. And I would actually say no. The most important thing is that they are happy. If they're more productive, it's good. But if they're not more productive, then well, it doesn't matter. Which sounded weird to me because I have a company, and I think if they're happy but not productive, there won't be a company for long.
True. It's a thank you for explaining that. It's a healthy balance, and you're right that productivity should drive happiness, and happiness should drive productivity, vice versa. Yeah. They're almost two sides of the same coin. And when you lay too far on one side, you end up with Henry Ford working people to the bone. Yeah. If you lay too far to the other side, you end up with this like kumbaya experience where nothing gets done.
This is what we call hippie scrum.
I'm definitely going to use that again. So at this point in the book, Fabian, you start showing all these patterns and anti-patterns, right? Like different things to think about as you go through your implementation, what to do, what you've seen, what you might want to think of. And I loved your statement here because this applies to so much in what we call the agile industrial complex, right? Everybody's got something to sell. However, you have the line here that patterns are not an end-all solution to a particular problem. They're a starting point you can build off of. Explain that, if you would, for our listeners a little bit more.
Okay, so maybe let me say something about patterns. So patterns are a solution to a problem in a certain context. Okay, and actually, Jasar and James Copeland and the Pattern Group just published a book which is called A Scrum Book, where they described, I don't know, over 90 patterns. And so if you have the Scrum guide that gives you the rules of the game, the patterns give you some solutions to some common problems. But as you just said, you have to take into account the context that you are in. So it's not a recipe, no? It's not like, okay, buy the patterns book and implement all the 93 patterns and then you will work. So the patterns are some good ideas that you can, like, once you have implemented the basics, which is the Scrum guide, the next step you can do is take, for example, the patterns and see if some of the patterns might help to solve the problems that you see now, the impediments that we've just discussed.
And I love how you just use the term recipe, right? Because a lot of times when people see a framework, when they see a pattern library, they treat it like it's baking a cake, where you have to follow all the steps in a scientific way to get the end result. Whereas I think you and I, and any practitioner who's experienced would agree, it's more like cooking, right? Where you have a recipe, but on the fly, you're tasting, you're swapping things out, you're doing this, to attempt to staple a framework or a pattern onto an organization implies that, like you said, there's no context. It's just a carbon copy where life is way more gray and more nuanced than no, I just put this here and it's perfectly going to work. So along the idea with patterns, you also go in a bit on scaling. Right. And the first thing you say, which I want to explore because we've had multiple guests echo this same sentiment, is when it comes to scaling, don't do it. So talk to me about your experience and why that's, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. I will admit to the audience, I'll admit to you, I agree wholeheartedly. Where did that come from? That thread of thought?
Okay. So, probably several reasons. Like one is obviously right now, most questions we get as to how do we scale? We have a Scrum team that has done one good sprint. How do we scale? But I think a more deeper reason is this. So I think if you optimize how you do the work and actually also optimize what you do, because there's lots of stuff you don't even have to do, then you can develop many products with one team. In many cases, you don't need more than one team, so you don't actually need to scale. And the thing is, with scaling, obviously you want to scale with a minimum bureaucracy, but the thing is, at the end, the synchronization will cause you some bureaucracy. So scaling without any bureaucracy has other problems, coordination and synchronization problems.
Right.
So if you scale, if you have more than one team, it comes at a cost. So the thinking of not scaling is to avoid this cost if you can. So if you don't need to scale, don't scale. Like, it's not like, okay, I have 5 teams, so let's coordinate them. Well, let's first check if we even need 5 teams. Now, if you need 5 teams, okay, that's another thing.
Right.
But many people don't even check if they need 5 teams.
Right. They look at this framework and they say, oh, we're going to do this. Let's bolt it on. And you talked a lot about that. I mean, obviously, for those listeners, Fabian is a Scrum guy, so there's a lot about Scrum and scale here. You touch on that very deftly, I thought. I'm personally, I love the thing in Scrum at Scale of the enterprise. What is it? The executive agile team or the enterprise agile team, the EAT. I love it because I'm a big believer of they should feel the same pain that you do, and they should be involved in the same way you are, because then there creates that sense of ownership. One of the things you talk about when it comes to scaling, which I thought was, I actually printed this out, it's on my desk. You have a call out here that when you're thinking of scaling, communications is, and I'm going to read it verbatim. When scaling, communications is a top priority in 4 areas. Communication saturation, number 1, everyone gets the information they need without gaps. Number 2, communication channels are streamlined and easily managed. Number 3, decision latency is kept to a minimum. And number 4, reduced degrees of separation between one person and another. So I thought, I gave that, I sent that to a couple of people I work with, because I said, when a lot of the problems we run into when we attempt to scale, it really is, it's the communication problem. And like you said, it's the bureaucracy thing. So scaling isn't necessarily, I think you would agree, it's not necessarily a bad thing if you keep communication and transparency in mind. And I think sometimes we end up off in the woods.
For sure. So definitely. So at the end, we scaled lots of projects and lots of companies. And I think what is the promise if you try to put a recipe over every company if it's the same context.
Mm-hmm.
The four attributes you just mentioned are the main attributes I think we should try to optimize when we scale. So a company is a kind of a system. You can think of it as a system. It has several attributes, not only those four, but those four are important in my opinion. And Scrum at Scale, for example, is a meta framework actually. So it's not even a framework; it's more a meta framework that you can use to adjust it to this context, to optimize in that context these four variables.
Perfect. Yeah, I thought that was a very elegant way to lay bare the biggest problem that we have. It really is just the people talking to people.
Yeah.
And and there's an attempt to try and replace that with Jira tickets, with stories and rally. And again, it's the whole 3 C's. Go to the conversation piece. Just, I had a good friend of a good buddy of mine who's actually on the show. Troy talks about how with Wischief, right, and cost of delay, what you're trying to do is you're trying to replace a communication problem with a math problem.
Yeah.
When you really should just pick up the phone and call Fabian and say, Fabian, is this really the most important thing I should be doing right now?
Yeah.
So, we're running up on time, Fabian. I want to be cognizant, but I wanted to talk. One of the last things here, you have a quote which is early on in the book, which I thought was really resonant, and I'd like to talk a little bit about it. Where you say, if you want to change the culture, you have to change the system. And if you want to change the system, you have to change the culture. I think I got that right. So talk to me about that a little bit, because there's that whole system thinking and how the culture is tied to it. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so there's a little bit more complex way and a little bit easier way. So let me give you the easiest way. So if you think about culture, what everybody talks about cultural change, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is culture? So you can make that as complex as you want, but at the end it has several parts. So there's a very deep-rooted part, which are your values probably, that nobody can see. And then there's a part of your behavior, for example, which is easier to see. Mm-hmm. And if you use only that without going into more detail, so obviously your values drive your behavior. So the most common approach would be to try to change the values, which is a pretty difficult thing to do, because that goes back to the point I go to you and say, hey, Jason, your values are not good, take mine. Or take the one from the Scrum guy. Okay. So that won't work. But I don't know if you've ever heard about this psychological example. If you are sad and you just smile, it makes you feel better.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the other side around. It works both sides, but it's the other side around works also. So if you just smile, you feel better. So if you just change your behavior with time, that can change your values.
Got it.
If you want to make that more complex, so at the end, the point I'm trying to make there is that you have to touch the structure. So if you are structured in one way,
I misquoted you, and now that's why I'm looking at the book. I misquoted you. It's if you want to change the culture, you have to change the system. If you want to change the system, you have to change the structure. And I misquoted you. So thank you for not calling me out on that, Fabian.
But yeah, that's what you have to do. No, that's Conway's law basically.
Mm-hmm.
If you are structured in silos and you want to create a modular system, that won't work. Like, you will basically replicate your communication structure in the product you build. So if you don't touch the structure, you can do an experiment with one pilot Scrum team that will work inside the structure. But if you want to do that as a big scale, you have to touch the structure.
And that rung home for me, because listeners may remember I took a course last year in large scale Scrum taught by Craig Larman, and that's one of his laws, right? Culture follows structure. And I think I speak for me and you and for a lot of our listeners, where one of the problems we consistently run into is the changing of the structure is the elephant in the room that we're all kind of staring around, because that's a big monster to start. That's a big ball of twine to start unraveling, right? Now you get into fiefdoms, and, you know, Fabian's an executive VP somewhere who's built an entire kingdom. And when you start messing with the structure, you're almost inadvertently challenging his stature and role.
Yeah, you do. You definitely do. Yeah. First of all, that's true. Like you can do some experiments with a couple of pilot teams, and you can go around that. But if you want to do that with 500 people, 1,000 people, 2,000 people, there's no way around that. You have to touch the structure.
Right. It's staring you right in the face. If you don't want to do it, you know, each system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. Well, there you go. There you go. All right, Fabian. Well, we're almost out of time. So I wanted to give you a chance. We're obviously going to have a link to the book in the show notes, but if people want to find you, if they want to learn more, maybe they want to discuss with you directly, they want to engage you, where can they find you? Where should they look you up?
So the easiest way is probably LinkedIn, just Fabian Schwartz on LinkedIn. You can also go to scrumnetwork.com if you're interested. We're operating all Latin America. And yeah, the book is, well, you said the link will be on the show, so it's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and every major retailer.
Yes, and I strongly suggest checking it out. So once again, Fabian, I want to thank you for taking your time. I know we're all locked in the house anyway, but I really do want to thank you for taking the time to speak with me. On behalf of Fabian and myself, I do want to thank all of our guests, all of our listeners. Hope you enjoyed this. If this is your first time tuning in, you can subscribe. If you'd like to join the discussion, we have a very, very vibrant Discord server. Today we were arguing about, I think, the book. No, not arguing. We were discussing the book, This is Lean. They're resolving the lean paradox. So if you want to get in, find us at Agile Uprising. I think it's discord.agileuprising.com. Once again, we also do have a Patreon, all that sort of stuff, Discord, the whole nine. So again, thank you, Fabian. And until next time, this is Jay Hersko in the Agile Uprising podcast signing out.